I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who'd watch her whole life curl up in smoke from a lawn chair across the street. You think you've got time. Time to fix the window latch that always sticks in the back room. Time to finally repaint the porch. Time to talk to that boy next door with the cigarette tucked behind his ear, like he's too young to know what destruction really smells like. I saw him that night. Standing there. Just watching. Not helping. Not calling. Just staring like the fire was something he'd been waiting for. The heat hit first, dry, hungry. It pressed against the windows like a stranger asking to be let in. Then the light, an awful orange flicker on the hallway walls. I thought it was a dream. I honestly thought I was dreaming. It wasn't the alarm that woke me. That old thing hadn't worked since my Harold passed. I meant to change it, really, I did. But life, well, it has a way of stacking up on your shoulders, doesn't it? Grocery lists. Grandkids. Doctors. Grief. And no one ever says, "Hey, Grandma, when's the last time you checked your smoke detector?" So when I opened my eyes, I saw the hallway glowing like some portal to another world. I smelled melted plastic. Old photographs. Wool. All cooking together in a nightmare I couldn't wake from. The first thing I grabbed was the box of recipes under my bed. Don't ask me why. Years of birthdays and church suppers stuffed into a shoebox. I left behind my purse. My shoes. My wedding album. And I ran. Barefoot, in my nightgown, down the steps I'd swept every Thursday morning for 42 years. Out into the street. The cold air hit me like a slap. And across the road, there he was. Eli. That's his name. The neighbor's son. 19, maybe 20. The kind of boy who doesn't mow the lawn but always has the time to rev his car at midnight. He was leaning against his mailbox, arms folded like he was waiting for a bus. Just watching my house burn. No panic. No phone in his hand. Just watching. It wasn't an accident. I knew it in my bones. The way you know when someone's lying to your face. The kind of knowing that doesn't need proof to feel true. You see, I'd had run-ins with his mother. Lately she'd been complaining about the hedge I hadn't trimmed. About the pine needles falling in her driveway. Silly things. Petty things. Last week, Eli told me I should move. "This neighborhood's not made for old people," he said with that smirk. "You're in the way." At the time, I laughed. I told myself he was just a boy mouthing off. But now? Now I could feel the words land, heavy and hot, like embers. And there, across the street, my house, the one I raised 3 children in, the one I painted pale yellow because it reminded me of lemon bars in springtime, that house moaned like an old animal as it collapsed in on itself. People came. Sirens. Neighbors. Lights flashing red and blue across my nightgown. But no one looked me in the eyes. Not really. I heard one of them say, "We think it started near the back fence." That's where Eli's cigarette butts always ended up. Where the grass never quite grew. And I stood there, barefoot, holding a scorched box of index cards while they sprayed my past with cold water. I remember the cold more than the heat, if I'm being honest. The kind that seeps into your knees and tells you you'll never feel warm again. Someone wrapped a blanket around me. A woman I didn't recognize. Said she was from the Red Cross. She asked if I had family to call. And that's when it hit me. My daughter hadn't called in 3 weeks. My son lived 3 states away. My grandkids, well, they send texts when they remember. I had given so much of my life to being their soft place to land. Birthday cakes. Emergency babysitting. Long talks after heartbreaks. But when my world caught fire, they weren't here. That's when I realized. I was alone. Not just that night. I'd been alone for years. Just hadn't noticed. Too busy keeping the coffee warm, the sheets clean, the cookies stocked. Too busy being what everyone needed. So I sat. Right there on the curb. On someone else's front lawn. Watching the last walls of my home fall in. And I thought, maybe this was always going to happen. Maybe I just didn't want to see it. It's a strange kind of grief, the kind that comes with betrayal and fire and silence. It doesn't cry loud. It hums low in your bones. But as I sat there, something shifted. Not like a light bulb. More like a door creaking open somewhere inside me. I remembered a story from when I was 10. I'd set my doll's dress on fire, playing too close to the stove. My mother slapped my hand and said, "Now you know what not to do." But my grandmother, she looked at me and said, "You're lucky. You get to decide what to do next." That voice came back to me, sitting on that lawn. Soot on my skin. My life in ashes. And I thought, I get to decide. Right now. I get to decide what to do next. It didn't feel like strength. Not yet. It felt like quiet. Like the kind of quiet that comes before the birds start singing again. So I wrapped that blanket tighter, stood up on my cold feet, and took my first step toward whatever was coming. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't walking for anyone else. Just me. Let me tell you about the choices I made, most of them small at the time, but they stacked up like stones in a garden wall until I couldn't see past them anymore. You know, I wasn't always this gray-haired woman people walk past in the grocery store like I'm scenery. There was a time I danced barefoot in the kitchen to Sam Cooke. There was a time I was the woman men turned to look at twice. But life has a way of turning bold colors into soft pastels when you're not watching. I met my husband, Charles, when I was 21. He liked that I listened. Said my quiet steadiness was what he needed. I took that as love. And maybe it was, in the beginning. But love that only sees what it needs in you, well, it slowly stops seeing you at all. We had 3 children. I gave them everything I had, energy, time, pieces of myself I didn't know I was handing over. Late nights, school lunches, soccer games, college forms. I was the background hum that kept the house from falling apart. And when they grew up, I didn't stop. I became the emergency contact, the unpaid babysitter, the therapist over phone calls that always started with, "Mom, can I ask you something?" Don't get me wrong, I loved being needed. It gave me purpose. Made me feel like I mattered. But the thing about always being the giver is, no one teaches you how to ask for anything in return. My grandson Jamie used to spend every summer with me. We'd sit on the porch eating popsicles, watching ants carry away crumbs. I'd braid his hair just the way he liked it, even when his dad said it made him look soft. He'd rest his head on my lap and say, "You're the only one who listens, Nana." But last summer, he didn't come. Didn't call. I heard from his mother that he's finding himself now. I suppose I should be proud, but it felt like being erased from the story. You give and give, thinking love is a ledger, and surely your account is full. But when I needed someone, when the fire took everything, I realized I'd been paying into an empty account. Eli, the neighbor boy, well, he used to come by when he was younger. I'd give him ginger snaps and let him sit in Charles's old recliner. He was a quiet kid. Lonely. I saw myself in him, maybe more than I should have. One summer, I paid for his school books. His mother didn't know. I just said they were donated. I never told anyone. I thought kindness was meant to be quiet. But quiet kindness disappears too easily. People forget. I think the first time I noticed something wasn't right, really, deeply wrong, was the way people stopped saying thank you. It's such a small thing, isn't it? But it's like a temperature drop. You only realize it's freezing once your fingers start to ache. There was this one Tuesday, I remember because it was trash day and the cans were lined up like little soldiers along the curb. I was bringing a pie over to Mrs. Harrington, who just had her hip replaced. I saw Eli on his porch, cigarette glowing like a warning light. He didn't wave. Just stared. His eyes felt colder than the air. Like he saw me as something in the way. And I told myself it was nothing. Just a boy. Just a look. But that night, I couldn't sleep. My bones buzzed like there was something trying to rise up out of me that I kept shoving down. I suppose I've done that my whole life. Pushed down the parts of me that were too loud, too sad, too much. Because that's what good mothers do. That's what good wives do. That's what good women do. You learn to stay soft. To fold. To disappear just enough to make room for everyone else. But folding long enough, it turns you into something smaller than you remember being. And then one day, someone lights a match, and the life you built, the one held together with careful sacrifice and quiet strength, it goes up like it was never solid at all. What no one tells you is that when you give too much without boundaries, people start to believe they're entitled to your yes. They take your time, your labor, your silence, and when you finally say no, it feels like betrayal to them. But I know the real betrayal now. It wasn't the fire. It wasn't the silence from my children. It was how I betrayed myself, over and over, by never saying, "This is too much." I thought love meant giving everything. I know better now. I remember another memory. It came back to me clear as glass after the fire. My mother, standing in our old kitchen, flour dust on her apron, telling me, "You have to make yourself useful, honey. That's how people will keep you." I carried that like gospel. I made myself useful until I forgot I was also supposed to be loved. Not for what I do. Just for who I am. Funny how it took losing everything for me to finally see what I'd been giving away for free. But I've started picking through the ashes. Not just the literal ones, though there are plenty of those, but the emotional ones too. And I'm starting to find pieces of myself I thought had burned up a long time ago. There's something fierce in the woman who survives a fire. Not just the flames, but the kind of fire that comes from years of being overlooked, undervalued, unseen. I'm not that quiet giver anymore. And I don't think I ever really was. I just forgot. But I'm remembering now. What really broke me was finding out it wasn't just a careless mistake. It was intentional. I overheard it, wasn't even meant for me. Two boys laughing outside the gas station. I was inside buying canned soup and ginger mints, because that's what my stomach could hold since the fire. They were joking about the old lady on Willow Street, how she finally got the hint. And then one of them said, Eli's little fire starter plan worked after all. Just like that. Like I was nothing more than a punchline. Like my life, the walls that held my memories, the chair that still smelled like Charles, the quilt I stitched with my granddaughter, was some prank to be smirked over between Monster Energy drinks and loud music. My knees buckled. I had to hold on to the shelf of baked beans just to stay upright. The world went quiet and loud all at once. You ever had that feeling? Like your own body won't obey because your heart is too busy breaking? The pain wasn't just in my chest, it was in my hands, clenched so tight I left crescents from my nails in my own skin. In my throat, holding back a scream I didn't know I had in me. I walked out of that store without my soup. Without my mints. I just needed air, but the air didn't help. Nothing helped. When I got back to the little motel room I'd been staying in, the one with the flickering light and the smell of damp, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall for hours. Hours. I didn't cry. Not at first. There was something heavier than tears sitting inside me. Something colder. That night, I admitted something I'd never said out loud. I let them take everything. Not just the house. But me. My voice. My space. My time. My place in the world. I let them do it. Slowly. Over decades. I thought if I just kept loving hard enough, giving enough, they'd see me. But people don't notice a light they've always had, until it's gone. I thought of Charles then. I loved him, I did. But I also remembered all the times he left me alone at family dinners, to clean and host and smile, while he drank coffee and told jokes in the other room. How he never once asked if I was tired. How the kids picked up that same habit. How being taken for granted became the rhythm of our family. But it wasn't always that way. There was a summer, Lord, it must have been 1968, we rented a little cottage on the lake. No phone. Just board games and sandwiches and sunburns. And I remember one night, we were all out by the fire pit. Jamie was just a baby. Charles sang softly, his voice a little off-key, and I felt seen. Just for a moment. Like maybe everything would turn out all right. That memory came to me like a cruel joke. Like my heart's way of saying, see? You used to believe. I don't think I ever really stopped believing. I just got too tired to keep proving I was worth seeing. But sitting in that room, surrounded by silence that didn't even echo, I felt something rise up in me. Not anger, not yet. But something sharper than sadness. Like an edge forming where I'd been soft for too long. And I said out loud, just to myself, enough. That word cracked something open. The quiet cracked, too. And then the tears came. Hot. Ugly. Years worth. The kind of tears that have to come through your whole body, not just your eyes. But even as I cried, I felt different. I wasn't breaking anymore. I was clearing out. Making space. For something new. I looked at my hands. Wrinkled, strong. These hands that held babies, stirred soup, ironed shirts, wrote checks, stitched wounds both literal and otherwise. These hands were not done. That was the moment I decided I wasn't going to disappear. I didn't know what came next. Didn't know how. But I knew this, I wasn't going to keep living like I was lucky just to be tolerated. And I couldn't stop remembering how it felt when Eli looked at me that last time, cigarette lit, like I was in the way. Like I was a burden. No. I may be old. I may be tired. But I am not a burden. I am not something to be pushed out of sight. I remembered a line from a poem I read once, when I still had time for poems. She wasn't asking for fire. She was becoming it. That's what I felt. Like maybe I hadn't been burned down after all. Maybe I was just starting to burn the right way. The first time I stood up for myself was so small, you might laugh. It was at the diner, Margot's, just off Fifth. The same place where the waitresses wear bubblegum pink aprons and call everyone, hon. I'd been going there every Tuesday for over a decade. I always sat in the same booth, ordered the same tea, and left the same generous tip because I thought, maybe, if I stayed kind and predictable, people would keep seeing me. After the fire, I went back. I needed something familiar. A place where no one looked at me with pity. But that day, someone else was in my booth. A man, younger than me but not by much, with a laptop and a frown like he'd lost his password and the world at the same time. He had headphones in and didn't even notice me standing there. And for a moment, I felt that old instinct, the one that whispers, it's fine. Just go sit somewhere else. Don't make a fuss. But something in me flared. I looked at him, then at the waitress, Rhonda, and said, that's my booth. She blinked. Oh, sugar, he must not be known. You want me to ask him? No, I said. I'll do it. I stepped up to his table. My voice shook a little, but it was mine. Excuse me. I sit here every Tuesday. Could you please move? He looked startled. Took his earbuds out and blinked like I was a ghost. But he moved. And I sat down. And I cried into my tea, not because I was sad, but because for the first time in a long while, I chose myself without apology. That little moment, that booth, it wasn't just about tea or routine. It was about remembering I had the right to take up space. Since the fire, I'd been living in a subsidized complex for seniors. White walls, the smell of boiled cabbage, and a lot of people who forgot how to speak about anything but medications and TV. But one afternoon, I saw a flyer on the bulletin board. Create your own space, community decorating workshop. I stared at it for a long time. Create your own space. The words felt like a dare. So I went. I showed up to that little classroom with fabric samples and magazine clippings. Most people were talking about throw pillows and curtains. I was thinking about reclamation. The first thing I changed in my surroundings was my front door. I painted it robin's egg blue. Just that. Just a door. But every time I walked through it, I felt like I was walking into something that belonged to me. Inside, I took down the faded prints of lighthouses and put up photographs, ones I'd taken myself over the years but never framed. A tree in full bloom. Jamie's dimpled smile. My mother's hands kneading bread. Every photo I hung was a small declaration: I was here. I made beauty. I mattered. It's funny, the things you start to notice once you begin listening to yourself. Like how I used to hum when I cooked, but I'd stopped. Or how I hadn't danced in years, not even by myself. One morning, I pulled the curtains wide, turned on an old record, and danced barefoot in the living room. My hips cracked, and my knees ached, but Lord, it felt good. I laughed so loud I scared the neighbor's cat off the windowsill. And that's how I met Janice. She knocked on my door 10 minutes later, holding a tray with banana bread and a grin. You were dancing, she said. I like that. Janice was in her 70s, wore bright scarves, and had the sharpest tongue I'd ever heard. She called herself a retired rebel and said she'd spent her life taking care of others until one day she just didn't. We had tea that day. And the next. And before long, we were sitting in each other's apartments trading stories we'd never told our own children. She was my unexpected ally. She looked at me one day, eyes glinting over her teacup, and said, "You've got more fire in you than you think." And I believed her. Not everyone was happy about the new me, though. At our monthly tenant meeting, I spoke up, asked why the library had been turned into a storage closet. One of the board members, Mr. Elkins, frowned like I'd spit in his soup. "That's how things are, Margaret," he said. I smiled sweetly. Well, they shouldn't be. Later, I heard him mutter to someone, "She used to be so agreeable." He meant it as an insult. But I wore it like a badge. Because agreeable had kept me small. Agreeable had let people like Eli think they could burn down my world and walk away. And I wasn't that woman anymore. The next week, I started a book club. No one asked me to. I just did it. Printed flyers, knocked on doors, brought cookies. Our first book was The Color Purple. Half the group hadn't read a novel in years. By the end, we were crying and laughing and arguing like teenagers. That's when I realized something. I didn't just want to survive. I wanted to live. So I made more changes. I started saying no to things I didn't want to do. No to visits that drained me. No to being the one who always remembered birthdays and never had hers remembered in return. And yes, too. Yes to art classes. Yes to bold lipstick. Yes to therapy. Yes to me. One day, I was clearing out a box that somehow survived the fire, a box I hadn't dared open until then. Inside was a pair of ballet slippers. Mine. From when I used to dance as a girl. They were tiny. Soft. Worn thin at the toes. I held them against my chest like a secret. I'd forgotten about that girl. The one who spun in circles just for the joy of it. But she hadn't forgotten about me. I joined a movement class at the community center. I was the oldest one there by a decade, but I didn't care. I moved like the body I had was enough. And it was. I started calling myself by my first name again. Not just Mom. Not Nana. Not Mrs. Harper. Just Margaret. Just me. One evening, Janice and I sat on the bench outside our building, watching the sun dip behind the trees. I told her I was thinking of visiting my sister in Oregon. We hadn't spoken in years, some old wound neither of us remembered clearly. Janice smiled. About time you gave yourself a new story. I didn't answer right away. But in my heart, I knew she was right. You see, for so long, I let other people write the chapters of my life. I was always the supporting character in someone else's plot. But now? Now, I had the pen. And I was just getting started. What I found that day changed everything. It was buried in a box I hadn't touched in years, tucked behind old tax returns and brittle, yellowing envelopes. I was clearing out a storage unit that the city finally let me access, what was left from the fire. They said, you might want to salvage anything important. Most of it was ash and warped metal, but there was this one box, edges singed, top slightly melted, but still intact. Inside, there was a letter. Not addressed. Just folded carefully, as if it had been waiting to be found. The handwriting stopped me. My own. But younger. Sure. It was a letter I'd written to myself in 1986. Part of some workshop I took after Charles's first affair. The assignment was simple: write the truth you're too scared to say out loud. I don't remember writing it. But the words hit like a slap. You are allowed to want more. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to leave. I sat there on the cold concrete floor, letter trembling in my hands, and it felt like I was reading a message from someone who loved me enough to beg me not to vanish. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe some part of me always hoped I'd need it. And there, surrounded by rusted tin and the mildew stink of loss, I realized. I had always known I was disappearing. It made me wonder who I really was if I wasn't just the caretaker. The background character. The keeper of birthday lists and casserole recipes. Who was I before I learned to say yes when I wanted to say no? Who was I before the fire? Before Charles? Before motherhood stretched me thin into something soft and invisible? Suddenly, all those memories looked different. The ones I used to wear like medals. The nights I stayed up sewing Halloween costumes. The weekends I cooked and cleaned for family who barely stayed long enough to hug me goodbye. The dinners I hosted while Charles laughed a little too hard at other women's jokes. I used to think those were signs of strength. Now, I saw the strain underneath. The quiet resentment. The ache I never gave myself permission to feel. I wasn't angry, not exactly. It was deeper than that. Sadder. Like mourning a version of myself I never let live. That night, I made a promise. I said it out loud, to no one but the stars outside the window of my little studio apartment. I will not go back to sleep on my own life. I'd been half living for too long. Going through motions. Taking scraps of attention and calling it love. But no more. The next morning, I did something that would have terrified the woman I used to be. I wrote to my daughter, not to scold, not to guilt, but to tell her the truth. I said, I love you. But I won't keep chasing a relationship where I feel invisible. I didn't send it to start a fight. I sent it because I needed to hear myself say it. I wasn't sure she'd write back. But that wasn't the point anymore. The point was, I was starting to speak again. Not just in whispers. Not just to the mirror. But in real, bold declarations that said, I'm here. I've always been here. I started reinterpreting everything. Every choice. Every silence. Every time I bit my tongue or smiled through hurt. And I forgave myself, not because I was wrong for loving, but because I'd mistaken sacrifice for value. I thought if I gave enough, they'd never leave. But I was wrong. People leave. Things burn. Time slips. And through it all, the only thing I ever truly had was myself. So I made another decision. I wouldn't just rebuild. I would reinvent. I got rid of the last storage unit. Let go of old things that no longer felt like mine. I shredded letters, sold dishes, donated clothes. With every box I cleared, I felt lighter. I wasn't carrying a past that never gave back anymore. I was making space for something new. Something mine. And I knew, I didn't need anyone else to tell me who I was. I finally remembered for myself. Got it. Let's do this right. The first thing I did was change my appearance. Not because I was trying to impress anyone. Not to feel younger, or prettier, or even braver. No. I needed to look in the mirror and see someone different. Someone I hadn't met before. Or maybe, someone I had buried under decades of saying yes, of making do, of dimming myself down so others could shine. I went to a salon in a part of town I'd always considered for other women. The ones with big sunglasses and gold bangles, who carried purses that cost more than my car. I almost didn't go inside. I stood outside that plate glass window, watching them fuss over a woman's hair like she was royalty, and I thought, what am I doing here? I should turn around. Go home. But home wasn't home anymore. Home had burned. And maybe that was the whole point. So I pushed the door open. The receptionist barely looked up. Name? She asked. I told her I didn't have an appointment. Walk-ins are tight today, she said, tapping her nails on the counter. Unless, do you want color or just a cut? Both, I said. Cut it short. And make it red. That got her attention. The stylist was a young man named Lucas with arms covered in tattoos and a voice like melted caramel. He didn't ask why I wanted such a drastic change. He didn't say, "Are you sure?" or "That's a bold choice for someone your age." He just looked at me in the mirror and said, "You've got good cheekbones. Let's show them off." When he spun me around 45 minutes later, I didn't gasp. I didn't cry. But I did smile. And it wasn't a small, polite smile. It was wide. Fierce. Like something that had been trapped in my ribs for years had finally clawed its way out. The hair was the start. After that, I found myself in second-hand stores, touching clothes I used to think were too loud for me. Bright scarves. Chunky jewelry. Soft leather boots. A mustard yellow coat that made me feel like sunshine. I bought it all with the money from my emergency fund. The same money I'd once set aside for when the kids need help. They hadn't called. Hadn't written. Hadn't shown up when my life turned to soot. So I figured, if I wasn't going to live for them anymore, I might as well start living for me. But change on the outside is easy. It's cosmetic. What came next was harder. Quieter. And much more dangerous. Because now that I looked like someone new, I had to ask myself the harder question, what do I want from this life that's left? I wasn't young. My knees ached when I climbed stairs. I had to squint at menus now, even with glasses. I forgot words sometimes, tripped over my own thoughts. But I was still here. Still breathing. Still capable of making decisions that belonged to me. So I sat down with a yellow notepad and wrote a list. It wasn't long. I wanted to create something. I wanted to dance again. I wanted to travel, maybe not far, but somewhere I didn't already know the street names. I wanted to have dinner with people who saw me. Not for what I could do for them, but for who I was. And this one took me 3 cups of tea to admit to myself, I wanted to confront Eli. Not for revenge. Not to scream or threaten or make a scene. I just wanted him to know that I knew. That I saw what he did. That I wasn't the type to shrivel up and disappear. That I wasn't afraid. I didn't show up on his doorstep. I didn't corner him in the parking lot. I waited until the next neighborhood board meeting, where I knew he'd be, slouched in the back like he always was, acting like he didn't care about anything, when really, boys like him always care deeply about control. I wore my yellow coat. I sat in the front row. When it came time for public comments, I stood. My voice didn't shake. I want to speak about safety, I said. About what it means to feel unsafe in your own home. About what it feels like when the very people you trusted, the people you gave kindness to, turn that trust into ash. A few heads turned. Eli looked up. His face gave nothing away. But his fingers tapped on the table like a metronome trying to keep rhythm with something unraveling inside. I lost everything in a fire, I continued. They said it was an accident. But we know better, don't we? I didn't say his name. I didn't have to. I paused. Not for drama. Just long enough to feel the weight of my own words. I'm still standing, I said finally. That's what matters. And I sat down. No one clapped. This wasn't that kind of meeting. But the air changed. You could feel it. I had taken my place at that table, not as a victim. Not as a story to be pitted. But as someone who refused to be erased. After that night, I found myself craving more spaces like that. Rooms where my voice didn't echo back unheard. I joined a women's circle at the community center. Not one of those whispery, incense-burning affairs, though I wouldn't have minded. This one was full of women with sharp eyes and cracked knuckles, who'd lived enough to stop pretending. We talked about aging, about anger, about all the things we'd swallowed for years. We laughed so loud the janitor told us to keep it down. I also found Maya, a local artist with green-dyed hair and paint always on her hands. She was half my age but twice as bold. Her studio was tucked behind an old church, and I wandered in one day chasing the sound of Nina Simone on vinyl. She asked me if I painted. I told her I didn't even doodle. Doesn't matter, she said. Art isn't about being good. It's about telling the truth. So I painted. At first it was all just color, messy, jagged swipes of red and orange and blue. But over time, something softer started to show up. A girl on a swing. A woman standing in firelight. A bird mid-flight with torn wings. Maya called my work brutal and beautiful. She hung one of my canvases in the front window. For the first time, my truth had a place to live. I began taking care of myself in new ways. Not with lavender lotions and warm baths, though those things had their place. But in harder ways. Saying no when I meant it. Canceling visits that drained me. Letting phone calls go unanswered if they came with strings attached. I started writing letters, not to send, but to say what I never dared before. To Charles, I wrote, I needed more from you. I just didn't know how to ask. To my daughter, I loved you so much, I forgot how to love myself. That wasn't fair to either of us. To myself, I'm sorry I waited so long to come back to you. But I'm here now. I taped that last one to my mirror. Some nights I still cried. Don't let anyone tell you becoming your own person is all empowerment and sunshine. Some nights I missed the way things used to be, even if used to be wasn't good, it was familiar. And familiar has its own gravity. But each time I doubted, I'd do something small to remind myself I was building a new life. I bought a spice rack and filled it with jars that had no labels. I cooked meals without recipes, letting instinct take the lead. I burned a few, sure. But sometimes, I got it just right. And that's what this whole journey started to feel like. A recipe I was learning to cook by feel. Some bitterness. Some heat. A little sweetness when I least expected it. A new dish I could call my own. Because here's what I know now. You don't become your own person in one big, dramatic moment. You become her slowly. Every time you say no without guilt. Every time you choose the yellow coat. Every time you take your seat, paint your truth, speak your name. Every time you stop apologizing for being alive. That's how it starts. And that's how it continues. Day after day. Word by word. Step by step. And I, Margaret Harper, am still stepping. Absolutely. Here's section 7, Finding My Voice, expanded to approximately 2,000 words in a rich, emotionally layered first-person narrative with deep paragraphs and a strong arc of catharsis and reclamation. I chose the place carefully. It wasn't about grandeur or drama. I didn't want a confrontation in a courtroom or a screaming match on someone's front lawn. No. I needed it to be someplace where my words would land like stones dropped in still water. A place where silence wasn't absence, but power. So I chose the library. Not just any library, my library. The one I'd volunteered at for years, helping children sound out words, restocking returned books, putting on little felt puppet shows every other Thursday. The same library where I once believed if I was useful enough, kind enough, they'd never stop needing me. It felt right to speak there. To take up space in a room where I had once only whispered. The meeting was scheduled for 6 p.m. A local community forum, some small-time neighborhood affair that drew a mix of retirees, young activists, and bored homeowners trying to look engaged while scrolling on their phones. But I knew he'd be there. Eli. Of course he would. He joined the board after the fire, actually. Said he wanted to make things right in the neighborhood. Can you believe that? The boy who'd stood across the street with a cigarette in his mouth and indifference in his eyes while my house burned, now sitting at a table beneath fluorescent lights and pretending to care about zoning regulations. I arrived 10 minutes early. Wore my sharpest blazer. Navy blue, fitted just right. Hair pinned back to show the angles of my jawline. No lipstick. I didn't want to paint myself softer. I wanted them to see my age, my years, my sharp edges. Let them look into my eyes and know I'd earned every single line on my face. He saw me when I walked in. I watched his expression flicker, just for a second. That was all I needed. That little break in the mask. I took my seat in the front row. I didn't speak during the introductions or the first agenda item about sidewalk repairs. I waited. Because finding your voice isn't always about speaking first. Sometimes it's about waiting for the right silence to place your truth into. When they opened the floor for community commentary, I stood. Slowly. Intentionally. I didn't hold notes. I didn't need them. My name is Margaret Harper, I said. I lived on Willow Street for 47 years. I raised 3 children in a house with yellow siding and a cracked front step. I gave out pumpkin cookies at Halloween and donated books to this very library for decades. I paused, not because I forgot what came next, but because I wanted them to feel the weight of what I had given. What I had lost. What I had reclaimed. Last year, I continued, my house burned down. It was called an accident. But I was there. I remember who stood across the street and did nothing. Who watched. Who smiled. I didn't name him. I didn't need to. My voice carried the name like a shadow behind every syllable. And I've been quiet, I said. Because that's what I was taught. To be polite. To not cause trouble. To let men talk over me. To nod when dismissed. To whisper even when I had every reason to roar. My voice didn't shake. It was clear. Rounded. Firm. The kind of voice I hadn't used in years. Maybe ever. But I'm done with that now. Done pretending I don't see what I see. Done folding myself up so others can spread out. I have lived through fire. Literal and otherwise. And I am still here. I looked at Eli then. Met his eyes. You don't get to erase me, I said. He blinked. Once. That was all. The rest of the room? Dead quiet. Not because they were shocked. But because they recognized it. The truth. That kind of truth doesn't ask for applause. It settles over people. Sticks to the skin. I sat back down. My heart pounding. Not from fear. From adrenaline. From victory. And I swear to you, I have never felt more alive. That night, walking home, the air felt different. It wasn't lighter, necessarily. But clearer. Like fog had lifted and I could finally see the lines of my own story, sharp and definite, trailing behind me and stretching forward into the dark. It would be easy to say I felt triumphant. That I strutted home and poured a glass of wine and celebrated like some character in a novel. But that wasn't it. What I felt was relief. Like I'd been holding my breath for years, decades, lifetimes, and finally exhaled. The truth had lived in my throat so long, it had started to rot. Speaking it wasn't just healing, it was necessary. But speaking the truth doesn't mean the world suddenly becomes kind. The next morning, I received a letter in my mailbox. Anonymous. Handwritten in block letters. You're too old to be stirring up drama. Learn your place. No signature. No return address. But I knew the handwriting. I'd seen it on petitions, on neighborly notices posted to the community board. I stood in my kitchen with that letter in my hand, and I didn't shake. I didn't cry. I laughed. Because it confirmed what I already knew. They were afraid. Not of me. But of what I represented. A woman who remembered her voice. A woman who survived fire and kept walking. A woman who refused to go quietly into the night. They wanted me to learn my place. But here's the thing. I have. And it's not behind anyone. It's not silent or invisible or erased. It's at the front of the room. At the microphone. On the page. In the paint strokes and the pages of the books I read, and the stories I now write down in notebooks that used to stay blank. Finding my voice wasn't about volume. It wasn't about shouting louder than anyone else. It was about speaking with conviction. With ownership. With the kind of honesty that makes cowards flinch and allies rise. Because once a woman speaks truthfully, unapologetically, it's impossible to put her back in the box they built for her. And I don't want to go back. I won't. Now, when I walk through town, I don't look away when people stare. I look back. I meet their gaze. Some nod. Some turn away. A few smile, sheepish. Even Eli. I passed him once outside the grocery store. He looked thinner. Less sure. He didn't speak. But he didn't look away. He knows. He knows I know. And I'm content with that. Because I didn't need revenge. I needed acknowledgement. I needed to witness my own story. And to be witnessed in return. That's what voice is. Not noise. Not performance. But declaration. I was here. I mattered. I matter still. And I am not done speaking. There's a strange kind of peace that comes after everything burns down. It isn't the kind you expect, no triumphant rebuilding, no rush to replace what was lost. No, it's quieter than that. It settles in your bones not like absence but like space. Room. A clearing where something new might grow, if given time. The first few days after the fire, I felt weightless. Not in a joyful way, not like flying, but more like floating in water with no idea which way is up. The neighbors brought casseroles and sympathy. One woman from the church left a loaf of banana bread wrapped in plastic on my motel room doorstep. Another handed me a card signed by half the street, "We're so sorry for your loss." But the truth is, I didn't feel like I'd lost much of anything right then. Because I hadn't been living in the past, not really. I was just learning how to live again. I spent those early mornings sitting on the edge of the bed, watching the sun stretch pale fingers through the cheap curtains. There was nothing familiar in that room, no photographs, no favorite mugs, no books I recognized as mine. Just the scorched recipe box, which I found myself flipping through even though most of the cards were unreadable. And yet, there was peace. Maybe because for once, I didn't have to make anything work. I didn't have to pretend things were fine when they weren't. I didn't have to hold anyone else's world together. Not Charles. Not the kids. Not the neighborhood busybodies who thought trimming a hedge equated to good neighborliness. For the first time in decades, I wasn't trying to fix anything. I was just breathing. It felt like freedom. Even if it came at a cost. Freedom feels like, freedom is a home that smells like lavender and coffee. I used to think freedom looked like big things, traveling alone, buying whatever dress I wanted, saying yes to every spontaneous adventure. But now I know better. Freedom feels like choosing which side of the bed to sleep on. Like putting cinnamon in your oatmeal instead of sugar, just because. Like walking barefoot through your kitchen without worrying someone will scold you for tracking in dirt. Freedom smells like lavender and coffee. Lavender, because I finally bought a candle I liked. Real beeswax, fragrant without being overpowering. Coffee because I drink too much of it now, and I don't care. I savor the warmth of the mug in my hands. I let the bitter slip down my throat like defiance. This apartment, my new one, is small. Just enough space for a worn armchair, a second-hand bookshelf, and a single window that looks out over an alley full of forgotten parking meters and the occasional stray cat. But it is mine. No one else's. Not rented for convenience. Not held onto out of habit. Mine. And oh, how sweet that word tastes on my tongue. Sometimes I sit in the middle of the floor, cross-legged, just staring at the walls. At nothing. And I feel lighter than I have in years. Because this place doesn't echo with expectations. There are no voices from the past telling me I should be doing more. No children calling for help with homework. No phone ringing with another request. No husband sighing in the next room when I ask him to talk about his day. Just me. And the quiet. And sometimes, when the wind comes through the open window and carries the scent of blooming jasmine from the courtyard below, I laugh, just a little, for no reason at all. Because I realize something. I'm not lonely anymore. Not like before. Before, loneliness sneaked up behind me while I hosted dinners no one thanked me for. While I folded laundry no one remembered I did. While I listened to everyone else's problems and forgot to name my own. That was the worst kind of solitude, the kind that lives inside you even when you're surrounded by people. But now? Now I am alone, and I am whole. That is different. That is everything. My people, those who stayed, the teacher, the grocer, my granddaughter, they're my real family. Family is not always blood. Sometimes it's the person who remembers your favorite jam and puts it aside when it goes on sale. Sometimes it's the girl behind the counter who asks how your morning was, not because she has to, but because she cares. Sometimes it's the woman who shows up at your door with a pot of basil and says, "Thought you might want to plant something." Janice was the first to stay. She didn't offer platitudes or pity. She just showed up. With tea. With stories. With a sharp wit and eyes that saw straight through my carefully constructed calm. Then there was Maya, the artist who taught me that painting isn't about talent, it's about truth. Who gave me brushes and said, "Start anywhere." Mr. Patel, the grocer, who started giving me extra avocados and never asked why I suddenly preferred shopping at 9 p.m., when the aisles were empty and I could move at my own pace. And the teacher, Ms. Alvarez, from Jamie's old school. She reached out after the fire, not to ask how I was doing, but to tell me what Jamie had meant to her students. That he'd once written a poem about me braiding his hair and standing between him and bullies. That he still talked about me when he visited the school. That surprised me. That warmed something cold inside me. And then, there was Lila. My granddaughter. She called the week after the fire. Not a long call. Not tearful. Just her voice, soft but steady, asking if I needed anything. We didn't talk about the house. We didn't talk about Eli. We talked about the weather. About her classes. About whether I still made peach cobbler. When I told her I didn't have an oven yet, she paused and said, "Okay. Well, we'll fix that." And just like that, I knew. Some people leave. Others stay. And some come back. Not because they owe you. Not because they feel guilty. But because they remember the love you gave them without expecting anything in return. That's the kind of love that lasts. Even through fire. Even through silence. Even through years of mistakes. I packed up the last of the storage unit yesterday. Boxes of history. Boxes of ash. Things I saved because I thought they represented permanence. They didn't. They represented endurance. But endurance isn't the same as ownership. So I sorted. Gave away dishes. Donated clothes. Let go of furniture warped by smoke and time. And I did something else. I burned my old apron. Not literally. That would have been too dramatic. I simply tossed it into the trash bin outside the community center and watched it disappear under donated winter coats and expired yogurt. That apron, stiff with years of starch and stain, was a symbol of the life I lived. Silent labor. Quiet servitude. Love measured in meals and clean floors and unspoken sacrifices. I wore it more often than I realized. Wore it like armor. Like identity. Like proof that I mattered. But I don't need proof anymore. What I need is presence. And presence doesn't come from serving others, it comes from showing up for yourself. So I stopped wearing aprons. Stopped cooking for anyone but me. And every time I pour hot water into my favorite mug, I use the fire-scorched kettle. It sits on my stove, dented and darkened at the bottom, looking like it barely survived. Which it did. I keep it not as a relic of loss, but as a reminder. Of resilience. Of rebirth. Of the fact that sometimes, the only way forward is through flames. Asterisk new identity, I introduced myself as Mary. Just Mary. Not the grandma who got burned. Asterisk. I didn't change my name. Not really. I kept Margaret. That is mine. But I dropped the titles. No longer Mrs. Harper. No longer Grandma. No longer that poor woman whose house burned down. Just Margaret. Just me. At the art class last month, the instructor asked us to introduce ourselves. "I'm Maya," she said. "Painter. Queer. Coffee addict." "I'm Janice," said my friend. "Retired rebel. Tea lover. Excellent at knitting sweaters nobody wants." When it was my turn, I hesitated. Then I smiled. "I'm Margaret," I said. Survivor. Dancer. Storyteller. Still learning how to be bold. And that was that. No explanation. No apology. Just a declaration. Because here's the thing. You can't spend your whole life being defined by other people's expectations and then wonder why you feel invisible. I spent decades playing roles so well, I forgot there was a woman underneath. But role-playing ends when the stage burns down. And I am not building a new life on someone else's script. I am writing my own. Every brushstroke. Every candid laugh. Every quiet moment with a book and a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. This is my life. Not the one built on sacrifice and silence. But the one built on choice. On presence. On purpose. And I am still stepping. Still growing. Still becoming. And this time, I am becoming me. It was the kind of evening that felt like a secret gift from the universe. Soft light from paper lanterns hung between branches I'd planted with my own hands, new trees, young and hopeful in the earth where once stood nothing but ash. The scent of fresh basil and rosemary floated through the air. Someone brought wine. Someone else brought bread. We sat on mismatched chairs in crates turned upside down for stools, passing around a platter of roasted vegetables and stories. I looked around the circle and smiled to myself. There was Janice, barefoot under the table, sipping red wine and telling a wildly exaggerated version of how we met. She insisted I had been dancing so loudly I scared 3 cats off the roof. Maya and her partner, Lila, were deep in conversation with Mr. Patel, whose grocer's shop had become our unofficial community center after the fire. He still gave me extra avocados, even though I no longer needed them to feel seen. And there, leaning back with arms behind his head, was Jamie. My grandson. He wasn't a boy anymore. Not even close. But when he caught my eye and smiled, I saw flashes of the child who used to rest his head in my lap and ask if ants ever got tired of carrying things. He came back. Not because I asked him to. Not because I begged or reminded him of summers past. He just showed up. And he stayed. That night, surrounded by soft music and shared silence between bursts of laughter, I realized something. This is what family looks like now. Not blood alone. Not obligation. Not tradition kept alive out of habit. Family is the people who choose you. Who sit with you in your garden under handmade lights and laugh like they finally know where they belong. And in that moment, I knew I belonged too. Asterisk celebration of self, I gave a toast, to fire, may it only ever be in our hearts. Asterisk. I raised my glass. No one shushed anyone. No one clinked their glasses together in eager anticipation. They just turned toward me, eyes warm and curious, knowing this would be more than a simple cheer. To fire, I said slowly, letting the word settle over us. There were a few nervous chuckles. To fire, someone repeated. I held up a hand. Wait. Let me finish. They listened. To fire, I continued, the kind that destroys. The kind that clears away what's dead. And the kind that warms us when we're at our coldest. A pause. A breath. But mostly, I said, voice steady, to fire, may it only ever be in our hearts. There was silence. Then, one by one, they lifted their glasses. To fire, they echoed. And as the candles flickered and the wind rustled the leaves above us, I knew we all understood. Fire isn't always loss. Sometimes, it's transformation. And mine had come. Eli left town last fall. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't knock on my door. Just packed up his car one morning and drove off without a word. Some people noticed. Some didn't. I did. But I didn't chase him. Didn't call anyone asking why he left. Didn't send a letter full of accusations. I let him go. Because I don't need his apology to heal. I don't need his recognition to know who I am. Silence used to scare me. It used to feel like rejection. Like being erased. Now, I see silence for what it is. Sometimes, it's cowardice. Sometimes, it's fear. And sometimes, it's peace. He may have lit the match. But I chose to keep living. That's the ending I'll take. That's the power I reclaimed. So yes. He moved. And I'm still here. Standing in my doorway. Looking forward. Not afraid. Not angry. Just present. And that's enough. I stood in front of the house today. New walls. New paint. Real smoke detectors. I designed every room. Every window. Every corner tells a story I chose. No one else's. Today, I made coffee and opened the door wide. Fresh air rushed in. Birds chirped somewhere distant but close enough to hear. I leaned against the frame and looked out. For a moment, I saw her. The woman I used to be. Still wearing Charles's ring. Still folding laundry before sunrise. Still waiting for people to remember she existed. She stood at an old doorway once. One that led into a life that didn't love her back. But now? Now I stand here. In my own home. On my own terms. And I smile. Not out of sadness. Not out of bitterness. Out of pride. Because I walked through fire. And I built something better. I'm not the same woman who watched her life burn from across the street. I'm not the woman who folded herself into small spaces so others could stretch out. I'm not the mother who forgot she was also allowed to ask for love. I'm not the grandmother who waited for phone calls that never came. I'm Margaret. Dancer. Survivor. Storyteller. Still learning how to be bold. A year ago, someone might have told me I'd find joy again. I wouldn't have believed them. But here I am. Barefoot in my kitchen. Dancing. Laughing. Alive. And oh, how sweet it tastes.